Well, I'd like to welcome everybody to our presentation here today. We're going to be discussing the Munds Park mapping project, which is a remapping project of the floodplain in the Munds Park area. This is a stakeholder presentation, and we're going to be walking through some of the details of the Munds Park area. Before we move any further, I'd like to introduce and welcome Supervisor Matt Ryan to the meeting. Supervisor Ryan has been involved with this area for a long time and is well known by folks out here and many in the county. And we want to welcome you, Supervisor Ryan, and open the floor for you to have some few opening remarks, please.
All right, thanks, Scott. Yeah, it's been almost 3 decades of working with the good people of Munds Park and Pinewood area. And as Scott noted, Matt Ryan, Coconino County Supervisor, District 3. I want to welcome everybody. The intent tonight is to go over floodplain remapping. And then it's also important. It's a venue for the public. We're proceeding at a point in this process to provide the opportunity for the public to give feedback. And it can get complex, and that'll be explained as you go through presentation. The good thing here is we have gathered a lot of expertise that can help advise people. This particular presentation is being provided to professional organizations, and we will have a follow-up reaching out to the community itself and individuals. One of the reasons that we need to do it is you think about over time. It's been 30 years since we've been doing mapping, and with technology, we've become much more accurate with the shift in technology, and it enables us to have an opportunity to have more accurate flood mapping. So part of the process is FEMA that handles this at the national level is trying to get communities to move forward and work together with them in updating our maps, which is important for anybody that wants to develop and or if they are threatened or do have flooding. There are opportunities associated with how they approach mitigating the effects of flooding. So again, I'll note that we have many experts here. In some cases, you'll see that flood threat may have increased for certain properties. In other cases, it may have decreased. As we initiate this process, which will have a timeline that'll be explained later on, it provides an opportunity for the property owners to have a way of giving feedback, and if they question the results, a mechanism to go through that process. So welcome everybody, and I'll pass this back to Scott. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Supervisor Ryan. Appreciate you being here. So for a bit, I want to just, before we get down into the full-blown agenda, I'd like to take an opportunity to introduce the team that's on the call here today. And these are all the folks that have been intimately involved in this project and getting these maps produced and out and published and moving forward. I'm just gonna kind of go across the screen, so in no particular order. John Carr, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, thanks, Scott. My name is John Carr. I'm with Coconino County Community Development. I'm the engineering supervisor, and I see every floodplain permit that comes into the county.
Thank you, John. Michael Bishop.
Yeah, thank you, Scott. My name is Michael Bishop. I represent FEMA Region 9. Our office is in Oakland, California, and our area of responsibility includes Arizona and Coconino County. And so what I represent is the program that is administering the National Flood Insurance Program, and underneath that program, the development of the flood hazard information that's expressed on flood insurance rate maps. Thank you, Scott.
Thanks, Michael. Bruce?
Thanks, Scott. Bruce Bender. I am a community outreach and insurance specialist providing support to Coconino County with this remapping effort. And we'll be talking later about the impacts on insurance.
Thank you, Bruce. Mike Shelton?
Thanks, Scott. This is Mike Shelton, work with ADWR. I'm the risk map coordinator for the state. Thank you.
Excellent. And then Mark, you able to visit with us? You may not be able to. Mark is, oh, go ahead.
Yes, hi, Mark Villaraca with Coconino County Public Works. I'm providing support for this group, and I do apologize if I go in and out. The Wi-Fi is not great here at Sky Harbor. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. Appreciate it. My name is Scott Ogden. I am with J.E. Fuller. We are providing the technical support on this and have been involved in the development of these floodplain maps in one piece or another for ongoing better part of about almost 10 years now. So very familiar with the area, and we'll be involved through this outreach and getting these maps published. So with that, I'm going to just quickly run through our agenda. We're going to give a broad overview of the FEMA risk map programming and what that is. We'll then narrow down into an overview of the actual Munds Park mapping project itself. We'll move over to the flood insurance world and talk about the effects of the map changes on flood insurance, and also the effects of the map changes on building requirements will also be discussed. And then finally, we'll leave with some slides of some next steps and or resources. Whoops. Right now, we've been involved in this process that actually began, as you can see on the slide, clear back in 2010 with an initial project that was a partnership between FEMA and the Flood Control District, Coconino County Flood Control District, to look at updating the flood insurance risk maps. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as we move on. Move forward to July 2023, FEMA published the preliminary study maps and firm panels, and those are now available online for viewing. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a bit. We're right now between that release of the preliminary maps and what will be eventually an in-person and virtual open house for the public in September, just in the next couple weeks. And then as we progress forward, looking into the later part of the fall 2023, there will actually be a document that FEMA will release that is going to start a 90-day public review process for appeals and comments. Then in spring, sometime spring 2024, the community is going to receive what is termed as a letter of final determination, which is basically saying the comments are closed and the maps will be finished and are become officially available. And then there's a 6-month compliance period for the county to make sure that ordinances are updated, that all the regulatory elements are in place so that everything is working and ready to move forward. And then finally, late summer 2024, those firm panels and that FIS flood insurance study will go into effect. We have a lot of terms that we use. We all like our acronyms very much, and so there's probably be several of them that we'll be referring to as we go through this presentation. And I thought I'd take a moment just to hit on what some of these really mean when you hear them. So FEMA stands for Federal Emergency Management Agency. FIRM and FIS. So FIRM stands for the Flood Insurance Rate Map. That is the actual map product itself that shows the flood risk in a map form. And then the flood insurance study is the FIS, is the document that contains all the supporting information for that, all the detailed supporting information for that flood insurance study. The special flood hazard area, SFHA, that is generally known as the high risk flood areas that are shown on the FEMA firm panels, those maps. Floodplain typically is any land subject to flooding. In this presentation, we are referring to the floodplains that are mapped by FEMA in particular. The reality is the entire everywhere is a floodplain. It's just a matter of how deep and whether it's actually been studied or identified, but you know, everything is a floodplain at some point. Base flood is a flood with a 1% annual chance of occurring in any given year. So it is a statistical term, but it is also the term that is used to define what is the base flood. The base flood elevation is the water surface elevation that corresponds to that 1% annual chance flood that can be reached or exceeded. We talked about the letter of final determination. And then finally, CCFCD, you'll see this in some of the slides, and that stands for the Coconino County Flood Control District. Just from a map view, this is an excerpt of a firm panel map that you would typically see if you were to pull up or download a firm panel and take a look at it. And there's some particulars on here that kind of detail some of these things that we were just talking about, and in particular, the top term, the floodway. And the floodway is basically a portion of the floodplain that's reserved for without increasing the water surface elevation at designated height. So, and we'll talk a little bit more about how this gets to it, but basically it is a highly regulated corridor of the overall floodplain, and we'll talk more about that in a minute. Flood zones, there's high risk flood zones. Any flood zone that is shown as an A or AE or AO or AH, there's several different types of A something flood zones. Those are known as the high risk areas. Moderate risk would be what we call a shaded zone X, which has a 0.2% annual chance of being flooded by during any given year. And that is what we would call a moderate risk. And then a low risk area is a mapped area that has been generally determined to be outside of the 0.2% annual chance event. Now, I would stress that there are a lot of areas that may be X, but they may not have necessarily been studied. And so there's, again, your flood risk is always there, just depending on how much. I want to give a quick overview of what a floodway is and why it's important. The graphic here is a graphic that illustrates how a floodway is determined in a typical sense of what you might see on a firm panel, where you have the floodplain is this dashed line, this blue dashed line along here. That would be the base flood elevation or the floodplain that is in the natural existing system as it is. The floodway is determined by artificially encroaching into that a distance, equidistance from either bank, basically, to create what we call a surcharge. And that surcharge would be limited to no more than a foot depth. Usually it's typically held to less than a foot depth. But the idea is that if you were to squeeze this floodplain in from both sides and with fill or development or something that would not allow the water up in that overbank anymore, the remainder would be that regulatory floodway, and that is very highly regulated. With that, I'd like to ask Michael Bishop if you would mind giving us an overview of the FEMA risk map program. Basically, we're going to look at this from a national level down to the state and local level.
My pleasure, Scott. Thank you. So as Scott said, that there is a national level context. And so if we start there and work our way down through the region level and from the region to the state and the state to the county, it will give the context of the programs and the authorities that FEMA has that are behind the establishing of the content that are the flood hazard information that's expressed on flood insurance rate maps and in the FIS text. And so I just want to take a couple of moments here to share that with you. Of course, we work under the National Flood Insurance Program. And one of the authorities we have underneath that major program is a mapping program called FEMA's National Risk Map Program. And MAP is an acronym. You can see down on the bottom left, it stands for Mapping, Assessment, and Planning. And then as we implement the risk map program, what we try to do just in repeat fashion is to identify risk, and then we can assess the risk to figure out if there's something that we need to do something about. Then we communicate the risk to those that might be impacted by risk, and then together we band our resources and we mitigate the risk. We do something about it. So where we are in the development of the information on any given flood insurance rate map is really truly doing the engineering study to develop the information that then gets expressed. And that information that's expressed in this case is flood hazard information, as Scott previously described. Next slide, please, Scott. So across the nation, there are 10 regions that FEMA divides the nation into. The office in Oakland, California is the center, the headquarters for FEMA Region 9. And FEMA Region 9 has an area of responsibility that covers 4 states and 3 territories. And so one of the states on the mainland of the United States is Arizona. So that's how we overlap with the state of Arizona. And then, of course, within the state of Arizona is Coconino County. And within Coconino County, there's the flood control district that expressed interest in getting the information in and around Munds Park updated so that it reflects the current hazards that anybody might want to A, know about, and then B, mitigate against. So that's where it comes from. But you can see on the slide that we are invest in many things simultaneously. So for right now in Arizona, we've got 70 ongoing mapping projects that we're working to complete, one of which is the Munds Park project. In Arizona, there's 107 participating communities participating in the National Flood Insurance Program. 70 ongoing mapping projects in Region 9, and 27 of which are in Arizona. And these are data that are as of March 2023. So we came in partnership and support in partnership to get to where we are today. And of course, our partnership will continue all the way through the rest of the schedule that Scott also articulated a few slides back. So with that, Scott, I think that's everything that I can express at this moment. So I'll turn it back over to you. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Appreciate it, Michael. All right. I want to take a moment and we're going to go a little bit deeper into the weeds and talk specifically about our Munds Park project and what the remapping project entails and some of the results that we're looking at and whatnot. So on an overview basis, the Munds Park area, you can see the map here on the right, is the area. The general study area is the area that's outlined in the red over here. But the watershed that contributes to the flooding through this Munds Park area encompasses approximately 45 square miles. So that's pretty large, and it generally comes to the Munds Park area in 2 primary threads, one from the west and then one that comes in from the east and flows down here, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. The area has a mixed use development with very flat meadow areas that that are down in the bottom with then adjacent hillsides that move up fairly quickly and away from those flat meadow areas. There's some pretty significant hydraulic constraints. I mean that there are physical things in the watershed that control the water movement and the amount of actual ponding and whatnot that might be occurring. The first one is I-17. I-17 splits the study area, and the water has to move under I-17 through fairly large box or some sort of culvert structures, usually boxes. And then there's a full-blown bridge crossing down at the very outlet of the system. Another constraint to the system is the Odell Dam and Lake down over here in this corner. The dam itself is currently rated as an unsafe dam by ADWR, Arizona Department of Water Resources, and it does definitely create a hydraulic break in the water around it, into and out of the dam. Pinewood Boulevard, which is one of the main thoroughfares on the area generally east of I-17, is a controlling point with numerous culverts and locations where flow passes under the road. And then finally, the ultimate outflow, if you will, outfall for this overall area is down on I-17, where the flows are all basically collected and wind up flowing into Munds Canyon and ultimately progressing all the way down to confluencing with Oak Creek downstream. One of the characteristics out here that brings a significant flood risk is that these broad, open, meadow type areas have very shallow, somewhat slow moving flood flows that with depths in some areas that exceed 5 feet. So there's a definite unique characteristic to the flood flows in the area. As we have been working on these updates and the technical stuff, the entities that have been involved to this has been FEMA, the county's flood control districts, engineers, scientists that have been involved or referenced in the study and the update of the materials. The community organizations have been engaged on a regular basis. And then finally, residents and business owners in the area all have been involved and or pursued or discussed with on various aspects of this project as it's been evolving. To give you just a brief history of the floodplain, the FEMA mapped floodplain in the Munds Park area, the graphic to the right here, you can see the pinkish color line, that's I-17. And then you have that splits the project, and then we have the area east of I-17, which is primarily comprised of the golf course and some residents down in the bottom of that big meadow area, Odell Lake, and then upstream of that is Munds Park Wash. West of I-17 is we call it Munds Park West, and is where the flows come in from that area and cross under I-17 and then join with the Munds Park Wash. And then again, there's another major crossing from the north where flows come down from the north and cross underneath I-17 and confluence with Munds Park Wash. Right now, that just is an unnamed wash. But in the broader context, that is the general areas of floodplain delineation for this map. From a history perspective, the first maps were prepared. First study was done. The maps were prepared in 1993. So we are officially sitting on a 30-year timestamp of how old the mapping is for the area. A lot's been developed in that time. In 2010, the county pursued mapping to update the digital maps in the way of prior to this digital update, everything out there was the only way to assess it was on paper maps. And then the floodplains as they were mapped in 1993 were then digitized so that they could be published in a digital realm. In 2009, there was new topographic mapping acquired for the entire area. That was going to be the intended use of that was going to be to do this updated study. A new flood hazard study was prepared and produced in 2010 through 2012. And then after a few years, the study went through the processes of the reviews, and a set of preliminary floodplain maps based on the 2020 were issued. However, as the review of those maps was being performed, there was significantly additional data that became available since that original 2010 effort. In particular, this 2014 study by the USGS that developed regional, they call regional regression equations, and basically it's science that helps us to understand what might possibly be the base flood amount, how much flow is moving in that area during a flood event. There was also an additional, well, at that time, 2015, by then, there was an additional nearly 15 years of flood gauge record that became available. And between those two sources, it was determined that there would be that it would be worthwhile revisiting the original study. That was done. And from that period of 2016 to 2023, that's been the restudy time period. And now we are today with bringing the maps to you. The current, what we call the current effective floodplain, the floodplain that's currently shown on the maps today, on the firm panels today, is generally shown, the special flood hazard area of those maps is generally shown in this purplish color here. And that's the limits of those in the Munds Park area. Again, orientation, the map has I-17 running up through the middle of it. And then Munds Park West, Munds Park Main over here, and the hillside community. In that study, or based on that study, there are 399 parcels that are exposed to that special flood hazard area, that high risk flood area. Within those parcels, there's an identified 256 permanent structures. Those structures could be homes, businesses. They're basically any structure that would be identified as an insurable structure. And then of that 256 permanent structures, 51 of those are what would be known as modular trailers, or they're modular park trailers that are relatively permanent in the sense that they have been set on a foundation, their wheels have been removed, so they're considered a relatively permanent structure, and those are all existing right up here in Munds Park West. They also are similar to like the way a mobile home might be traded. With the remapping study, we have a much different look in the floodplain, and just quickly flipping between these two slides, you can see where the increases and the changes are occurring. Within those redelineated areas, the blue is now the new special flood hazard area. And within that area, there are 458 parcels that have been identified to be within that, 308 permanent structures, and 254 modular trailers. So basically, pretty much all the modulars that are up in here have been determined to be within that special flood hazard area. This graphic gives an illustration of where the primary increases in the area footprint of the special flood hazard areas are occurring. And there were some areas where we actually had some decreases, fringe areas, particularly along the edges. And then the gray, so the red increase shows an area of increase. These are areas that were once a shaded zone X or a low risk area and have been determined to be actually in a high risk flood zone. The green is the areas that were delineated in a high risk that are now determined to be in a lower risk. And then the gray is an area that's it was already identified as special flood hazard area. In those changes and some of the other things, a little bit more in the way of details, as far as the special flood hazard area removals for that 1%, sometimes it's called 100-year for parlance in what folks might have heard before. But the special flood hazard removals, we have 19 parcels that are being fully removed, 7 permanent structures that are being fully removed, and none of the modular trailers. The areas that are being added in the way of the analysis are 78 parcels that will be newly added, 49 permanent structures that will be newly added, and then all of the modular trailers, 203 modular trailers up in here. And with that, I want to turn the presentation over to Bruce Bender, and he's going to talk a bit about the impacts on flood insurance.
Great, thanks so much, Scott. Appreciate that. And changes in maps provide us, as you heard, updates in what the changes flood risk has been over the past 30 years. And in doing so with these flood maps, we find with changes in risk come changes in costs, changes in requirements for flood insurance, and also changes in building requirements. So my section I'm going to talk about, and some of you have heard me talk about this before in other meetings related to map changes across Arizona. Things have changed a little bit because of the new rating methodology that FEMA has. And after mine, we're going to bring John Carr in, and he's going to talk about the building the changes the maps have on building requirements. And we've invited to today's webinar, the lenders, the real estate professionals, insurance professionals, and the builders. So we're going to try to cover all the different topics, and we've got surveyors as well invited. So all these topics will be applying to you. So let's go ahead and get started. There we go. So I want to talk a little bit about the new rating system that FEMA has. I'm going to call it the legacy. Some call it risk rating 1.0. Basically, the way up until just a couple of years ago was the rating was based upon what the flood zone was and what its base flood elevation, where the height of the floodwaters were going to come in that 1% annual chance flood that sometimes people use the term 100-year flood. Well, all of that changed a couple of years ago, officially moved over last year, all of it to April of last year. And now we have this new pricing methodology. FEMA was calling it risk rating 2.0. We're trying to, now that we're a year into it fully, just calling it the new rating methodology. And a couple of things you'll notice on here in the green. We have additional data sources. They're now using 3 different catastrophe models on top of FEMA's data. They are using data from U.S. Geological Survey, from NOAA with the tidal surge. Hopefully that never affects us out here. We definitely have some changing condition issues. They brought in data to help identify certain heights, replacement costs, a lot of good information to make it easier for you, insurance agents out in the audience, to more quickly rate this. And to make it more specific, they're now measuring how far is that building from the flooding source and how high above the flooding source, like behind me, is that building. Its foundation, has it had claims before? They never looked at claims before. Whereas, with auto and homeowners, you have 1 or 2 claims, your prices go up. FEMA's never used that before, and now they're including that. And they're not just looking at that 1% annual chance. They're looking at what about those homes that'll flood at the 10%, 0.2% chance, or that 10-year floodplain. So what I'm going to do next is go through some of the effects of map changes. The first one is there are going to be those that are newly identified to be at high risk. And if you remember the slide that mentioned just a second ago, we've noticed that being added in there's going to be probably about 50 properties or so that be newly added into the high risk area. There will be some base flood elevation changes that will either go higher or lower. There will be some that are going to be taken out of the floodplain. Scott mentioned there'll be at least 7 structures that'll be coming out of the floodplain. But in a whole lot of the property owners there are not going to be affected at all. But this is a good time, especially up here with the wildfire chance that is up here in northern Arizona. Are you fully insured? Because after fire, as we know, comes flood. There is the let's first talk about this newly identified at high risk. So when a property is newly identified to be at high risk, and the maps become effective, okay? In the preliminary, it doesn't matter, but when they become effective, which is about a year from now, we're hoping, what's called the mandatory purchase requirement kicks in. Again, this is a requirement by the lenders. It's not FEMA's. And it basically says if you're insured, if you have a bank that's insured or backed by the federal government, then you will be required to carry flood insurance if you're in the high-risk area, that special flood hazard area. In our maps, this begins with the zone A, the letter A. But FEMA has a one-time cost-saving option known as the newly mapped discount, and it applies to policies that have been purchased or in effect within 12 months after the map's effective date. Again, it applies after the map becomes effective. Then once it gets that discount, then it will slowly go up in cost until it reaches the full risk premium, about 18% a year. So there is a money cost saving option for that. But what about if the base flood elevation changes? Goes up, as the illustration, it goes down. Well, the mandatory purchase requirement is there already, okay, because you've been in a high risk zone. So that doesn't change. Rates are based on the new risk rating 2.0 that do not include flood zones or base flood elevations at rating variables. So changes in flood zones, changes in that base flood elevation are not going to affect your rates. So bottom line is, just because the base flood elevation has increased, and John will talk about that from a building perspective, it does change. From an insurance cost perspective, that does not directly affect the cost. What about the situation when you are in a high-risk area? And we have those, John had pointed out, there was about 19 properties that are coming out and 7 structures. Those on those fringes that he mentioned, if it's the property, if it's the building that's taken out, then the mandatory purchase requirement no longer applies. Now, the lenders can always require flood insurance if they feel there's still a risk to that building and they want to protect their financial interest. But the requirement, the law, no longer applies. But as I mentioned, flood zones aren't used as a rating variable anymore, so it will not directly affect the rates just because the risk has been reduced. But in Arizona, the risk may be reduced, but it is not removed. And in fact, 30% of all flood claims come from policies that are in the moderate low risk areas. And just think about the ones that didn't have a policy. They had to go get an SBA disaster loan or perhaps a grant, and it doesn't get them back. The grants don't get them back to full strength like a policy would. So the risk is reduced, not removed. And so the county strongly encourages you to continue to carry flood insurance. But as I mentioned earlier, and when I was going over a summary, there's some that'll be no change in the base flood elevation or zone or anything. They stay the same. They either stay in a high risk area or they stay in a low risk area. This is a good time for you as an insurance agent to sit there and ask and review your clients' policies in that area. Is it at replacement cost? And because quite often they only get it based upon the loan. Sorry, it seems to be advancing by itself. the lender only requires the amount of the loan. So they may not be at replacement cost and therefore may not be at claim time adjusted the way they would expect to be. And because they may only have gotten what the lender required, they may not have any content. So how are they going to cover, the furniture, kitchen equipment, clothes, all of those basic necessities of life there inside the house? And if they don't have any, this is a great time to give them a quote. Again, it's going to be top of mind for those property owners in Munds Park about these flood maps and flood insurance. So this is a great opportunity, you insurance agents, to jump on this. And realtors, they're going to be asking you questions as well. So be prepared to filter them over to a local agent to answer those questions. So in summary, if there is an increase in risk where it's going from zone X to A or AE, there is a money saving option. The mandatory purchase requirement applies, of course, as I mentioned, it kicks in. You're going to have to get it. But if they have the policy within 12 months, they can start out with that discount, which means a lower cost policy. The decrease in base flood elevation, there's no change in cost. Mandatory purchase requirement still applies. And likewise, when there is a decrease in risk, where it's going from a zone A to an X, yeah, the risk is reduced, but keep in mind, it's not removed. It is still there. You're still at risk. Keep your coverage, encourage them to keep their coverage and let them know there still is a risk. But a lot of them, as I mentioned, aren't going to have any change in risk. So this is a good time to discuss with the client if they are fully covered or not. And with that, that's the effects of map changes on building requirement. What I'd like to do now is pass it over to John Carr with Coconino County to talk to you about how do these maps affect the building requirements. John?
Thank you, Bruce. Again, my name is John Carr. I am the engineering supervisor for community development. So I will be seeing a lot of the permits that come in for new development. All right, so let's look at floodplain permitting requirements. What are the floodplain permitting requirements for improvements or repairs in a FEMA special flood hazard area? So let's take a look at some examples. And in these following examples, we'll discuss the permitting requirements. The current effective flood maps will guide floodplain management until FEMA issues a letter of final determination, unless the maps are more restrictive. I'll get to that in an example as we go through. After FEMA issues the letter of final determination, the new preliminary maps will guide floodplain management. So let's take an example project and check the current effective flood map. So here is, we say we bought this property and we're looking to put a house there, and we decide to put it right there as shown. The improvements are proposed in a FEMA special flood hazard area, zone AE floodway. And you can tell from the legend down here that says AE floodway with the diagonally hatched lines. So that impacts virtually the entire parcel except for a small portion up here. What that means is if you're going to come in and build, you'd have to get, in addition to a building permit, you'd have to get a floodplain permit. And with that application, you'd have to get a no-rise analysis prepared by a professional engineer. And you'd need to elevate the lowest floor to 1 foot or more above the base flood elevation. And that's for the current effective map. Now, if we were to zoom out more, we'd see what the BFE is, and that would tell us how high we would have to elevate the house. So let's take a look at after the letter of final determination is released. Now you can see that the whole parcel is covered by area AE. And again, there will be a base flood elevation associated with this new map. It's a slightly more than the existing map, but not much. So again, putting our house there, what we'd be looking at is the improvements are in a special flood hazard area, that zone AE designated by this blue shaded area. And the floodplain permit requirements would be to elevate the lowest floor 1 foot or more above the base flood elevation. Under this scenario, that no rise analysis is not required. So there is an advantage to when after these maps become effective. Let's take a look at another example project. So let's say a new structure given the current effective flood maps, and we want to put the structure right there. And from the legend, you can see that this is not in a special flood hazard area. It doesn't start with an A or an AE or the AE floodway. So the proposed structure is out of the FEMA special flood hazard area. However, the preliminary map is more restrictive for this property. And let's go to the next slide and see how that turns out. So we'll look at the requirements after the LFD, the letter of final determination. And again, on this property, you can see it's all AE. And so what we'd be looking at, if we put our structure in there, the proposed improvements are in a special FEMA special flood hazard area zone AE. And so the builder or the applicant would be required to elevate the lowest floor to 1 foot or more above the base flood elevation per these new maps. In addition, the applicant must also show that improvements here, along with any other anticipated permits in this area, won't cause a rise of more than 1 foot. And the reason for that in this area is this is on the west side of the freeway where a floodway has not been established. So the no rise analysis would entail just that no more than 1 foot rise. Now let's take a look at an existing structure for flood insurance implications. So this property here is under the current effective flood maps. You can see that this structure here is all in this orange area, which is the 0.2 annual chance flood hazard. It is not a special flood hazard area, so you would not be required to get flood insurance, but it's always recommended that you do so. Now let's look at the next scenario after the letter of final determination is released. And now you can see that zone A is creeping up a little bit closer up. And so now there's just a little sliver there of uncertainty. And if you were to call an insurance agent, a flood insurance agent, they'd likely say, yes, you're in a special flood hazard area. But because of, and the structure, because the structure may be in a zone AE, flood insurance is mandatory if the mortgage is federally backed. So what do you do in this case? Well, sometimes the level of survey or the resolution from the study is not clear enough to make a determination just by looking at the photo. So there's an option to use a letter of map change. And you can do that online. You can request a letter of map amendment. There's the link here. And what that basically does is you bring a surveyor out and they would establish that this lowest adjacent grade right next to the building is out of the special flood hazard area, if that is the case. And then the structure would be removed from the special flood hazard area and that mandatory insurance requirement would go away. So for a summary wrap up, at this point, we could entertain any questions that might be out there. But let's keep going a little bit and get back to where our process was. Here's a look at the timeline. Now we're right here just in September 2023. We have a couple open houses coming up, virtual and in-person open houses, followed by that public review and appeal period. And there's also some helpful resources here. There's a project overview, and I'll lead you to this website. If you have any map questions, this email address here, FEMAflood@coconino.az.gov. We'll get it to myself and I believe Mark Delarocca, and we'll be able to answer any questions you have. There's a phone number you can call. The same number is repeated a couple times here, and that's in the building department. And a couple other useful links for applying for a building permit, and then also the FEMA Map Service Center if you want to look at historical imagery, and then flood insurance questions here at floodsmart.gov. And as mentioned before, we have a couple more events coming up. There's a virtual open house scheduled for Wednesday, 13th from 6:30 to 8 p.m. There's the link there to that. And then followed by a few days later, an in-person flood risk open house on September 18th. So with that, I will turn it back over to Scott, and we can look and see if there's any questions.
All right. Well, thank you very much. Appreciate it, John and Bruce and Supervisor Ryan. Thank you all, Michael, for contributing to this. We're going to, obviously, we've been recording, so this will be posted up, accessible through the web link that is on this screen right here. And with that, we will close this presentation.
Just
wait,
Scott. Yeah, Matt Ryan here. Just a note, and for people that will be watching this video, and for those that are looking at the impact to their properties, one thing that we always encourage you to do, particularly if you own the house, you may not be required to have flood insurance, but we've seen our share of emergencies living in fire country, as noted. It is really important that you keep that in mind, and we encourage people getting the insurance. The other piece associated with this is it's not a matter of whether you agree or disagree in terms of if you want to question whether you're in this, you really need to bring your own expertise in that can verify whether it's a legitimate argument. So these are important notes for anybody watching this, and keep in mind that if you wish to proceed in that way. Thank you, Scott. And if you guys, if I'm saying it wrong, please contradict me. Thank you.
No, and maybe just to add a little clarification in that we talked about that 90-day process, and that 90-day appeal process, that is the time that the open to the public or anybody really that sees something that they would like to dispute, and you would come with an analysis that is equal or exceeds the same level of technical expertise as what was used to prepare the maps, then you can file an appeal, and then that will be considered by FEMA as a part of that ongoing 90-day process. So yes, thank you, Supervisor Ryan, for pointing that out. That's a good one. Anything else from the team? I'll open it up to the team. You got anybody else have anything they would like to share before we close this recording? All right. Well, thank you all. We greatly appreciate the opportunity to make this presentation, and we'll look forward to hopefully getting to meet with some folks out in person at the open house is coming up. And with that, we will close the meeting. Thank you.